sometimes forget. I also like to do a land acknowledgement, and this is an acknowledgement mainly for the Southern California. I know some people attend from other parts of the state. So I'll read off to you what I have crafted. Our Los Angeles Santa Monica Mountains CNPS chapter recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Chumash, and Quiche Nation peoples. We honor and pay respect to them, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of California's lands and their native flora. And of course, we honor all the many, many other um, tribes throughout California, because there were probably 90 to 100 at one time for their contributions ongoing. Um, so this evening, I'm honored actually to have my CNPS colleague, Alice Cantelow, here. And Alice is active in CNPS statewide, having held many offices in the statewide organization. And she is also a key mover and shaker in her CNPS El Dorado chapter governance. And most importantly for us this evening, she is the founder of the CNPS Wildfire Community, which she is going to introduce us to and tell us what's going on with it and what important work that community is doing for us regarding wildfires here in the state of California. So, Alice, welcome. And Alice is going to share her screen.
Thank you, Snowdy. Are we there?
I see you.
Good. And you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, I do.
Good. Okay.
And
Thank you
Alice,
all for having me.
I'm going to mute myself, except if there's a problem with the sound or something, I will jump in. Okay. So thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. So first, I want to say thank you for having me. I am from Northern California, from the Sierra foothills. And so my experience with native plants is different than yours down there in Southern California, although I did live in San Diego for 4 years. And I also want to just acknowledge that if any of you have lost your own homes, or have good friends or family who lost your homes, I hope that nothing I show or talk about today will be too disturbing. Obviously, on your year anniversary, it's a big deal to you all after the Eaton and Palisades fires. So I'd like to talk, though, today about the CNPS Wildfire Community, which is a new statewide forum, really, or advisory group within CNPS. And what I'm going to talk about then today is where that structure fits in. Where did it even come from, this idea of a community within CNPS? How is it different from chapters and committees? Because it is different. Why wildfire? And what exactly does the wildfire community do? It's a forum. It also does website material for CNPS, and it has a proposed policy that's out. And last, because we can't talk about wildfire without also talking about how do we best protect homes, lives, and native plant habitats too. All three of those. So just briefly here, a couple of slides just to see where this community thing fits in. Of course, with CNPS, there's the board of directors. There's also the chapter council at the top. And then the board of directors is basically the governing body of the chapter. Council approves strategic plan and also creates policies, and that's important. It's also a forum for people to talk to around the state with the different chapters. And then, of course, in addition to that, we have the state office and we have our chapters. And so the state office, I remember not too long ago, it was just a handful of paid staff, mostly doing chapter support. It's really grown. It's huge now. It's over 60 paid staff. It fluctuates slightly, doing all kinds of things from day-to-day operations to providing professional expertise to guiding external engagement. and through all these things and still doing chapter support. And then, of course, there's chapters like yours and mine, the El Dorado chapter up here in the Sierra foothills. There's 34 geographic ones covering the entire state plus bryophyte. These are all, of course, volunteers doing all kinds of different things at our chapters. So that's chapters, you know that. But what about these committees? There's tons of committees. There are these advisory committees between the board and the chapter council. There's volunteer-led committees like the carbon neutral, policy invasive weeds. There are some ad hoc committees, like if there's this particular task, they'll create an ad hoc committee and then it goes away when we don't need it anymore. And then, of course, there's chapter meetings by Zoom once a month on these various topics that this is really chapter support meetings to help chapters deal with all these things. So you've got all these different committees. So kind of putting them all together over here on the left side. Do you see my arrow? Yeah. Okay, great. And those are all, state and chapter. But now there's this new thing here called communities. Started off, the first one was a garden community. Now we have this wildfire community. It's possible that they're going to start a nursery community. And so it's different, separate from both chapters and committees. And where did this thing come from? Because it does also have staff and volunteers with it. Well, the concept sort of started back when the new bryophyte statewide chapter was proposed and accepted by the chapter council. And that was several years ago. I forget the exact year. And there was, a lot of discussion about, do we want a chapter that's not geographic? Here it is kind of topic based. It's about bryophytes. And the consensus was, yes, we do. But then at the same time, someone tried proposing a mountain bike chapter, and people said, no, wait a second, that really isn't what a chapter should be. And so I said, no, we're not going to have a mountain biking chapter. And so then the next concept was, well, what if we had virtual statewide chapters? There's a lot of discussion about that in chapter council, and people pretty much decided, I don't know. But then they set up a working group to kind of pursue it. And the idea was that the first virtual statewide chapter would be on gardening, actually. And so the working group came back to the chapter council. This was some of their slides in, I think, December of 2023. Yeah, there it says right there. And the working group, there have been 5 of them, 2 from East Bay, 2 from Northern San Joaquin Valley, 1 from Sac Valley, so all kind of Central Valley. And they all came back with, okay, so people really don't like the idea here of calling this the chapter. Chapters should be geographic. So then they said, okay, let's have it be called a community. It's a statewide community. And they came up with a gardening community. They wanted a paid Zoom account from the state office. And just to give you an idea what their idea was, for example, they were going to have a statewide list of publicly accessible California native plant gardens, how HOAs and California native plants would go together, how exactly do sheet mulching, other topics, things like this were of interest statewide to all people in chapters that were related to gardening. And they wanted to find 3 to 5 founding members for each topic. And unfortunately, it fizzled. They didn't get 3 to 5 founding members for any topic. They didn't get a paid Zoom account from the state office. And the state office was already doing a lot of statewide gardening content. And so it didn't seem like it really made sense. But I felt that this whole concept was still a really good one within the CNPS, and I'd love to see it grow. And I felt like especially it would be really good to the thing near and dear to my heart, which is wildfires. And so I started the statewide wildfire community in the spring of 2024, and we've been active ever since. And I think it's kind of a neat concept to have that they developed. I didn't develop the idea of a community that they developed, and it's worked really well for our wildfire. Now, why wildfires? Wildfires have huge impacts on, how do I get rid of this thing? Just a second, let me see. Oops, did I lose it? Yep. Sorry, I was trying to get rid of the thing on the side. There we go. Okay. So wildfires have huge impacts on native plants. So with climate change, we have abnormally intense wildfires in some areas. In some areas, we have abnormally frequent wildfires, like in Chaparral. Other areas, like the Sierra foothills, we have abnormally infrequent wildfires. Either one of those can lead to type conversion of native habitats. We have fuel reduction projects out there that are harming habitats. Things like mature oaks and other plants are being removed possibly unnecessarily, well, definitely unnecessarily. Fire suppression can be harming habitats, not always necessarily either, sometimes unnecessarily. And all this affects both wildlands and the built environment, the developed areas. And in fact, it affects all of California in differing ways. So wildfire is a really huge deal to native plants and becoming bigger and bigger with climate change. So when I started this wildfire community and working with other members, this is basically our purpose, was to have a forum in which we could keep each other around the state and also the broader native plant community that maybe is outside of CNPS. I'll talk about that in a bit, abreast of current wildfire science because there's so much science coming out constantly. We also wanted to include discussion of controversial topics such as the new zone 0 to 5 foot zone. So that was one, just kind of this forum to all be talking. Another one was to discuss local problems related to wildfire and native plants that people were having in different parts of the state. Hear from people how they're handling specific issues, what's working, what's not, and getting ideas from each other. And then in addition to that, we became an advisory group to the chapter council for a revised wildfire policy because chapter council is in charge of policy and the wildfire policy was an old one. And then lastly, an advisory group to staff also for enhanced website wildfire material. I'll talk about that in a second. There was some, but not very much. And we felt there should be more on the CNPS website. So just to give you an idea, this is our current participating members. It's ebbed and flowed a little over the last 2 years, but we have roughly, what is this? I don't know, maybe 15 or so people. This top group here are all volunteers from various chapters around the state. We have a couple from the Sierra Foothills, a couple from San Gabriel chapter, a couple from the East Bay chapter. We also have Bryophyte, Milo Baker, a couple from Marin, Northern San Joaquin, and Channel Islands. And these are people who come actively to our meetings and have been participating in a lot of what we've been doing. In addition to that, we have staff, it's really nice to have the combination because I think sometimes staff and volunteers are in two different worlds, and it's really nice to have us all working together. So we have these 4 staff members who come regularly to our wildfire community. In addition, there's been others who have come periodically. And again, it's volunteer led, but very much supported and includes the staff also. So the main outputs we've had over the last 2 years, obviously we've had these monthly Zoom meetings and lots of great discussions. We've also emailed each other anytime like a new big science report or something comes out that has to do with wildfire, people will send that around to each other. And then those 2 are kind of self-explanatory, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about these next 2 then. One is the new material that we are responsible for on the CNPS website, and hopefully there'll be more to come. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the draft wildfire policy, which went out to the chapter council in December and has until January 31st. We're hoping for comments. So if we look at the website, again, initially CNPS was a little nervous about putting too much stuff out about wildfire. So they had that wonderful wildfire recovery guide they made, which included stuff on like defensible space and stuff. But it was hard to find because it's called the Wildfire Recovery Guide. And we really felt there needed to be more out there from CNPS. And so since then, and with our, giving them some advice, but they definitely were the lead as the state office, they created this great wildfire resources page. And on that page now is not only the fire recovery guide, but also this creating a fire resilient home where you can find that easily. And then on down the page, there's more stuff. And our wildfire community was the one that provided them with this. And we got input from people, throughout the community as we created this. And if you click on that fire resilient home, it talks about, there's embers and the fire front and how fires work. It talks about home hardening. At first, I think CNPS was afraid to talk about home hardening because that's not our field of expertise, which is true, but it's so important. And so this is an excellent guide here, the Wildfire Home Retrofit Guide, and you can find it at the link then on the CNPS page. And then also we talk about defensible space and the various zones with lots of details on how you might actually create a home that's more fire resilient. And so we worked with the state office on that material for the website. Then another part of the website has this great CNPS conservation advocacy toolkit. I don't know how many of you have found that before, but it's really great. It talks about CEQA. It talks about, gives you resources if you want to be an advocate for native plants. And on that advocacy toolkit, there is an annotated bibliography on wildfire research. But that bibliography, which is great, is mostly focused on wildlands. It doesn't really have science having to do with defensible space or zone zero or how to protect homes. And so we as a community really felt that that needed to be on the CNPS website too, because as we'll be talking later, home hardening and defensible space are really important actually for native habitats too. So we've been collecting information. Right now, the state office has been really swamped with tons of work. And so we've been asking for, quite a while if we could get more still on the website having to do with some of that other science. And they haven't been able to accommodate that yet, but we're getting to a point where they might be able to. In the meantime, we've been assembling lots and lots of resources and science. And for example, here's one on housing arrangement, vegetation factors. We give it the year. I've got this whole spreadsheet going that, like I say, is not available yet, but will hopefully be available to both CNPSers and other people interested in finding a good source for some of the science behind this stuff. And if you notice here, this is a spreadsheet I've been creating, and there's research, but there's also presentations that are really good, videos that are really good. For example, that PBS documentary you may have just seen on the Eaton and Palisades fires. Documents that are critical, like 4291 defensible space requirements, certain websites that are particularly good, letters that people have written. For example, some of the people against 0 to 5, this would go into there. And then we're hoping eventually have a great image library that people can take images from and use for their own talks. So we're creating all this, we're collecting it all, but right now it's not going anywhere. But the idea is that it will eventually go into that conservation toolkit or maybe somewhere else that people can access. And if we follow the same one, this was a research number 50, and we go across to the right, not only do we have, its year and its name and stuff, but I also have a description of each one, a web link, talk about where exactly it's about. So like if you're thinking about Chaparral, you wouldn't really want to read this one particularly because it talks about Paradise and Magalia, which is up in the Northern Sierras. But there are some there that do have to do with Southern California. So we're collecting all this. So that's the website. Then in addition to the website, the other big thing we've been doing over the last year is a draft wildfire policy for all of CNPS. And this is something that would drive both volunteers and staff throughout the organization. And so again, chapter council is the one that creates and approves CNPS plant related policies. When I say create, they are, they get ones like us which was a proposed draft, which they now have out for comment. They will be the ones who eventually approve it or not. Before, though, previous wildfire policies, there are ones of 1995, 2003, 2010. So these are pretty old, 30 years up to 15 years ago. And as you probably know, science has really evolved. Wildfire science has evolved a lot since then. The wildfires are a much bigger issue throughout California. It's a very complex topic with lots of great information out there. And so we as a community realized we really needed to update those policies. So the 1995 one has to do with reseeding. And so there were people who really wanted to wait and update that one specifically. So that's still in the offing. If that's something you're interested in, Arlie Montalvo, I think would be really interested in hearing from you. So we addressed these two here and came up with a new draft wildfire policy that is very comprehensive, replaces those two older policies, and at least it's proposed to. And the idea is trying to bring consistent, up-to-date messaging to CNPS. So we've been working on this policy as a community monthly since spring. We created 7 different iterations based on edits and comments from all the community members. It's been a really productive experience. Our 7th iteration was finally our final draft. That went to the Chapter Council Policy Committee in November, and they did some edits, which then became our 8th iteration, which then went out to the Chapter Council in December and is now out for review. We have received some comments already, including some from your chapter. And we're hoping to put some of those into a revised version that will go out the end of this week. And we're asking for comments by January 31st, although, this is not a set in stone, and we may actually prolong that anyway. If you were to give comments, later, a little bit later than that, please do. We really want this to be a policy that everyone buys into or can buy into. Okay, so I'm going to look at the policy a little bit now here. I don't know why that funny green thing is there. Are you all seeing that too? Okay, good. Okay, so the purpose of the policy. We're trying to make sure that we provide a consistent science-based, and this is not as easy as it sounds. Of course, CNPS is always trying to be science-based, but there is, of course, conflicting science out there, and sometimes science that some people accept and other people don't. So it sounds good, but we are trying to do a science-based policy. We're also looking at things before, during, and after wildfire. So we're trying to be very comprehensive of all the different facets of wildfire and native plants. And kind of a summary of our entire policy, and let me just highlight a few words again, is that we locally adapted. So in other words, what's going on in your area is different from my area, is different from the coast area, is different from the desert. So we really wanted the policy to reflect that. We want to protect life, property, and ecological health. We recognize all three of those are important. We recognize that there's under-researched fuel management practices and there's more science needed. We also recognize the exceptional diversity of habitats and plant species in California is one of our most valuable resources, along with all their functions like cleaning the air, conserving water, stabilizing soils, and of course, supporting California's amazing biodiversity. So these are all things we wanted to basically cover in the new wildfire policy. And so some of the key issues that we address in the policy are, and this is important, that there's different solutions in different parts of the state. So chaparral, oak woodland, forests, they have different solutions. Urban areas versus rural areas have different solutions. So a lot of the key issues addressed can kind of be divided into two, actually. One, protecting homes and lives, the built environment, and I'll talk about that one too first. And then the second would be out in wildlands. So for the first, protecting homes and lives, again, different solutions, different parts of the state. We recognize that resident preparation is really critical. And that includes home hardening. If large mature trees are okay, the 0 to 5 zone should be free of anything easily ignitable. We had originally had in here of anything flammable, but that included plants. And there are people there's a lot of controversy over the 0 to 5 foot zone, what it actually should entail. And so we felt to go to a more general word that people could get behind was easily ignitable. And so there's a room for a little interpretation there. And I'm just going to kind of step back for a second and just make sure everybody's on the same wildfire page here. I'm going to have some just general slides here for a second about wildfire before we go on with the policy. So if we look at how something like a house catches on fire, and again, I am so sorry if you, like us, have ever lost a structure to fire. You need heat, fuel, and air. Okay, so when we're making little campfires, we know that we need to have air there around our wood, and that if we make the wood all too big, you can't start a fire. And so with the heat, you're going to give it a match. The fuel, you're going to have some small tinder or, kindling that's going to catch the larger fuel on fire, and then you're going to have some room for the air. Well, our houses are kind of the exact same thing. We have this wonderful dry wood that's separated from other dry wood. You've got lots of room for oxygen. You've got fine fuel like, say, mulch or something outside the house that catches the larger fuel like your wood wall on fire, and you end up with an ignited house. So where does the heat come from? Well, it can come really from 3 different places. The one we first think of is wall of flames. But I think as many of you are now aware, that's not actually the main way houses burn down. Another one is radiant heat. And this, of course, has been a huge one in both the Palisades and Eaton fire, where this fire burns. And because it caught fire, then these ones around it catch fire too, just from the radiant heat from that one fire, even if they were perfectly safe. And then third, and I have a 1 by this because this is really the main reason, up to 90% of the way that homes catch fire is from embers. and thousands of embers like this. And they're not necessarily just little, they can be big or even 2 feet long branches. So these three things, all of them are what we have to watch out for with our houses, but especially the embers. And so people actually have been studying for well over a decade or even two how houses burn down and what we can do to try to keep them from burning down. And as climate change happens and the fires get more intense, they keep having to up the science and try to figure it out. And it's not an easy thing to do. One thing they do, though, is that they do go out and study houses that survive versus ones they didn't. And so this is actually the campfire up in Paradise. These are all homes that were destroyed, and then these is one that survived. And you wonder, okay, why? Oops, wrong way. Sorry. So CAL FIRE actually goes out with these little handheld devices. Every one of these red homes here is one that was destroyed in the campfire, and the yellow lines are where they walk around each home, and they try to capture everything they can about what the home was made out, what kind of windows it had, what kind of roof it had. They didn't really until very recently start paying attention to the vegetation close to the house, unfortunately. Anyway, so they collect all this with their DINS process, which is damage inspection process. And then that data is available for people in universities to use, for people at UCNR to use, for people in the insurance industry to use, to try to figure out what is making some houses survive these fires. That's one thing. But then the other thing they're doing is they're doing actual experiments. And this especially is being done by IBHS, which is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. It's a nonprofit that is funded by the Insurance Institute because insurance companies don't really want houses burning down either. They'd much rather you paid premiums forever and they never had to pay you back. And so they want to find out what's making houses not burn down too. And so this is a facility they have in South Carolina, and it started out for tornadoes and hurricanes, but now they have moved to wildfires also, and they build these full-size houses and with different features. So this particular house on the right-hand side here, it's completely hardened. I think this is hardy board rather than stucco, but anyway, it has non-flammable walls. It has, double pane windows. The vents are hardened, whereas this one on the left is not hardened at all. Single pane windows. I think they ended up putting mulch in front of it too. The vents are just kind of open vents. So basically everything wrong. And then they have these ember generators and they bombard it with thousands of embers, just like in a real fire. And they see what happens. In this particular case, after just 10 minutes, these were both bombarded with the same stream of embers. But here, the mulch that was outside and right next to the walls caught fire and then moved up the walls and then into the vent and eventually destroyed this part of the house pretty quickly compared to this side of the house, which was perfectly fine. So there's also experiments. So there's both of those things, and experiments and looking at actual houses that burn down. And the lessons learned are that we don't need to be sitting ducks. And in fact, and this is interesting to us, wildfire is said to be the easiest disaster to mitigate for. A tornado that comes and rips your house off is actually much more difficult. And believe it or not, where the most expensive insurance right now in the United States is, according to one article I read, is actually Oklahoma. Not because of wildfires, not because of hurricanes, but because of hail. They're getting this gigantic new hail, much bigger than they used to get, again, because of climate change. So the point is that of all of these, wildfire is actually one that we can mitigate for and have our houses not burn down. So how? Well, it's kind of a three-prong approach. I like to think of it as one is you got to harden the home itself. And that's not always cheap. It's not always easy, but it's kind of the first line of defense so that when embers come, those thousands of embers come, they don't land on anything like this, for example, that would catch your house on fire. And part of the reason is if you have plants like this that are kind of dead or even have any dead material at all, which is most plants, and they're right next to a combustible wall, especially at the bottom like this, when the embers collect in here, they can then, get a little bit of a fire going that then goes up inside the wall. But another thing is defensible space and fire-resistant landscaping. That's partly so that firefighters can have a place to defend your house if it's not a huge fire, in which case there can't be all everywhere anyway. And then finally, wide access and emergency communication so you can get in and out. This is not probably a big deal where you guys are. It's a huge deal where we are because we have these narrow little roads. You can't get in if there's a fire truck trying to get out, or rather, you can't get out if they're trying to get in. Whereas I think where you live, that's probably not such an issue. But hardening the home and some defensible space are both still issues. So in talking about home hardening, I just want to just kind of briefly show you this. This is out of the University of Nevada, but this is a great image. An ember landing in any one of these 20 or 24 places, I forget how many there are, could start a fire that would ignite this house. And if you think about a house as kind of like a bucket with 20 holes, because someone could say, oh, but it's okay, I've got stucco walls, I'm not going to burn. Well, yeah, but what about all these other possibilities? Like maybe you have a window box, or maybe you have a plant right next to your deck, or maybe you have vents that have open. So it all works together. It's like if you had a bucket with 20 holes and someone told you, okay, which 3 holes should I fix? Well, if you don't fix all 20 holes, you're still going to lose the water. And same thing with a house. If you can't fix all the vulnerabilities, then those thousands of embers are still going to find a way in. And that's why the home hardening is kind of a big deal. And that's also why it can be expensive. So in coming back to our policy, remember our policy? Yeah. Coming back to the policy then, um, we realize that really the focus of public monies should not necessarily be on the wildlands as much as it should be on the homes themselves. Because if you can keep the house from catching fire, then it's not going to burn down. And that sounds obvious, but it's an important point that I'll come to again. So instead of spending tons of money on these long, long linear swaths like this, where an ember can be over here, or rather, a fire here, and the embers cross right over and then come right down into a community, that's going to be inevitable. And so you really need to be focusing on making the houses themselves hardened. And then we also recognized in the policy the building spacing is also really important. You can't move buildings that are already there. But for any new ones that are being built, if they're within, it turns out within like 50 feet or maybe 30 feet, there's different science on different numbers. Then you can do everything right, have home hardening, perfect defensible space. These 2 houses could be perfect, but if this one here catches fire and wasn't hardened, then these 2 are going to burn too, and then this one, and then this one, which of course is what you all saw happen in Altadena and the Palisades. And lastly, with the policy, we wanted to address urban versus rural fires and the increase now of urban conflagrations, and realizing the focus shouldn't just be on WUI anymore. It needs to be also in lots of other areas where urban conflagrations can happen. In fact, I think over the last, I forget how many years, whether it was 10 or 20 years, something like half of all the homes that burned down were not in the WUI. Sorry, the WUI is the wildland urban interface, which is what you think of with houses out in the rural area. In reality, it's been in urban areas, because when a wildfire gets into those, you lose lots of houses fast. Okay, so that's the first part of the policy. But then the second part of the policy starts to focus instead on wildlands, not on homes, and focuses on healthy ecosystems. And again, different solutions in different parts of the state. And we did want to be careful to try to avoid the term forest health, because that gets misused a lot and people use it for justification for cutting down trees just for the sake of it. But we do at the same time recognize that fuel management can be needed in wild lands. Now, here's an example of in a forested area, which is different than your chaparral, but you can have a forest like this that has been fire suppressed for a long time and so is overgrown. When a fire comes through, then everything burns, and you get these huge, abnormally large swaths of very high intensity fire where everything is burnt and scorched, including the soil. And that's not healthy. On the other hand, if you have something like this where it's not overgrown and where maybe it's been thinned either through prescribed burn or whatever, and you get instead when you have a fire, then it stays low to the ground, is a surface fire, the large trees survive. And instead what you land with is a patchy intensity result where you still have some areas of high intensity, but you also have moderate and low intensity fire areas, and you have this nice patchwork of everything together, and now you do have a healthy ecosystem. And so sometimes for that, fuel management is needed to get to that if you've started with something that's super overgrown. Now, again, different solutions in different parts of the state. Another thing we want to address in the wildfire policy is that the wildland fuel management, if it's done, for healthy ecosystems, it needs to be ecologically appropriate for that vegetation community and has to be actually needed. It's not every place that needs fuel management. The BMP or the best management practices are different in different vegetation types, and definitely needs to include funds and specific plans for preventing and removing invasive species in fuel breaks, so you don't end up with something that's even more wildfire prone and you've destroyed a lot of native habitats unnecessarily. And we also recognize that the focus shouldn't just be on rare plants, but preserving intact ecosystems. You don't really want huge areas of hills with type conversion that's changed from these beautiful chaparral, for example, communities to invasives. And so all of this we tried to address in the policy. And then lastly, fire suppression. Fire suppression can be incredibly damaging to native plants. And we want to make sure we recognize that it's necessary, but you want to make sure that it's done during true fire suppression emergencies, not used later outside of that actual fire suppression to do things like, oh, we've already got the machines here, let's go make some fuel breaks, because then you're not necessarily doing it in a careful and planned way. And so we recognize that in the policy also. Okay, so that basically just kind of runs through in general the wildfire policy. It's not incredibly long. I think it's something like 8 pages. If you want to see the draft wildfire policy, if wildfire is something that you're particularly interested in and have some knowledge of, we'd love you to have a look at it. You can contact either Snowdy or myself to get a copy of that, and we'd love to hear your comments by January 31st. And so as I kind of finish up here, I just want a few key points to remember. Wildfire has been called the easiest disaster to mitigate for. Doesn't mean it's the cheapest, but it's the easiest and most effective. Of course, they've been part of California for millennia, but with climate change, they're burning hotter, moving faster, they're more frequent and intense. So things are not a one-off. They're going to happen again. We as homeowners need to take responsibility. Wildland plants are generally not the enemy. So many people think, oh, if they just, gotten rid of some of the plants around our community, we would have been fine. No, the embers would still have come in. And once you get a couple of houses burning and their homes are close together, you can still use lots. And then a real wildfire guru, Jack Cohen, is the one who has pointed out, and people, including CAL FIRE's, realize it's a home ignition problem, not a wildfire suppression problem. And this sounds so easy, but it's so true. A home that doesn't catch fire in the first place doesn't burn. And so a house like this little one down here, well, it wasn't so little. This is actually Lahaina, not California. But if a house doesn't catch fire in the first place, so that's what you're trying to do. You don't want anything to help it catch fire. Then it won't burn as long as it's not closer than, say, 50 feet away from somebody else. So the wildfire community is pretty much done now with that policy, although we'll be working to help the policy committee kind of finalize it. And hopefully the chapter council will then approve it. We're continuing our monthly sharing of info and issues. We're perhaps creating now a wildfire position statement. There's some in the community who would like to see that happen. We're continuing to provide website material to public affairs, especially as they start to develop more wildfire content on the CNPS pages. We may have some legislative advocacy days. We had one that the state organized where we actually went and talked to legislators up in Sacramento, which was very interesting and a good experience, and other things as we go forward. And want to join us? Do you have a particular interest or knowledge of wildfires? Or would you like to start a different community? Do you see something, some topic that you think would be really useful within CNPS that could be at that same statewide community? I hope you consider that structure because I think it's a really great one. Okay, I think I'm done and I'm open for questions.
Well, so far I've just had comments in the the chat, and the latest comment is that John Keeley has arguing that climate change is not the reason for increased fires in Southern California. And once a fire enters the urban environment, the structures are the fire's fuel, not the plants. I think that's kind of what you've said as far as that last statement.
Yeah, yes, and
Diane,
interesting with the Keeley one. Do go to the CNPS Wildfire Resource page, and there's several that's kind of an older thing. There are some more recent studies that are definitely showing that climate change is a big part of it too.
so
Sorry. So go ahead.
Diana, you made those comments in the chat, and you have your hand raised.
Hey,
Would you like to
Snowdy.
unmute yourself? Hi, Diana.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. So first of all, I just want to say, and I apologize, so you cut me off, Snowdy, when you've heard enough. I've been working on fire policy with UCLA for over a year now. Dr. Travis Longcore is also in that with me. Dr. Greg Rubens, Max Moritz from UC, all doctors, people. I'm just an MS, they are PhDs. And so I'm not a fire ecologist, but I have oriented myself to this. And one announcement I want to make today, the City of Los Angeles City Council passed an ordinance that uh, is for a different approach to zone zero, that 0 to 5 feet around our homes. Currently, there is a draft at the Board of Forestry that they've been working on since January of this year. I have attended every workshop, painfully so, because they're 7-hour workshops, representing a coalition of well over 10,000 Angelinos, homeowners and renters in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm sure, Alice, you're familiar with the draft policy from the Board of Forestry. They postponed finalizing it. They're meeting again in March, but it was the last draft. They came out with some different options. Prior to that, it was very draconian. And anyway, in the city of Los Angeles, we passed an ordinance for option 4 and option 2. And for those that don't know what that means that healthy, well-maintained, hydrated vegetation and trees would be allowed 0 to 5 feet around the house in zone 0. And option 2 would also include protections for the City of Los Angeles's protected tree ordinance, which I think we all want. I want to just say that in turn, there is a lot of misinformation and information out there, and the people best to interpret the information are the scientists. So I also put in the chat, Snowdy, a little bit above my comment there, a link to a YouTube video that our group at UCLA put on a few weeks ago with some of the scientists, going over the science and then really interpreting the science. And the takeaway from that, and I encourage everybody to watch it, is that the science is very incomplete. Unfortunately, and I am a respect Jack Cohen, but the type of science that he mostly is dealing with is simulations at the fire lab. And a lot of the policy coming out of the Board of Forestry is experiments. I saw Yana Valachovic on there. She's one of those that had done a lot of experiments, and the PhDs at UCLA have some real concerns about those experiments. Their experiments are great. Simulations in the fire lab in South Carolina is good. It provides us with some information, but it doesn't really provide us with it's incomplete, and it's a certain type of information. So our concern is there's been a lot of policy based on incomplete science. And I'm so glad, Alice, that you do recognize that different approaches in different plant communities in different parts of the states what needed. And that really was really what the local ordinance was about here that was passed in the city of Los Angeles, because the state's zone zero is a one size fits all, and that's probably one of the biggest fatal flaws. Secondly, we have to recognize different fires, urban conflagrations in the city of Los Angeles. The Palisades and Altadena was a big tragedy, and I'm affected personally by it. The houses burned down because they were urban conflagrations. Zone zero, by the way, is about embers. It is not about radiant heat. And so there's a whole bunch of distinctions. We could talk about this for hours, but if people are interested in getting more involved and learning more, Snowdy, I can give you the link. I don't have it with me now. You can actually zoom in on our Monday monthly science meetings that we have hosted by UCLA. And that's where, we spend an hour once a week with presenters and talking about the information and the science that's presented. And
What's the title of the working group? What is the actual title of the group?
I think we call our UCLA, I don't even, science. It's very loose, the Monday science meeting, I keep calling it, so I apologize. We may have an official title on there, and it might be in that Zoom link that I put here in the chat. But I guess, Alice, my question is, if anybody from this UCLA group, or are you familiar with the group? And if you are, then is there anybody that's been involved in looking at your draft policy? And if not, then I would love to have the draft policy and I can bring it to the group for comment.
If you as a CNPS member would want to bring it to an outside group and then get some ideas, but we're not really ready to bring this to other outsiders. It's kind of a within CNPS thing because this is for CNPS. So that's kind of up to you, but we would be very interested in your comments. And I did want to mention a couple of things. The science, unfortunately is not clear, and there are people who do interpret it differently. And it's interesting you mentioned both Jack Cohen and Yana Valachovic. They don't do experiments. A lot of what they do, maybe Jack Cohen does both, but they both do a lot of looking at real world situations. So they, especially Valachovic, but also Jack Cohen, spends a lot of time over the last decades looking at actual things. So it's not clear and straightforward. And I'm sure you've been finding that if you've been all talking about some of the science at UCLA. I'd be interested in that group though myself. But the policy itself is not something we're putting out into the wide world for comments, but we are looking for, CNPS member comments on it. So,
well, that might be a great idea, is that I could you can contact me through my website, which has a lot of information, by the way. I devoted a website to this issue, dianaZnicole.com. I have no conflict of interest. I'm not making money. I'm not selling landscaping. I'm an ecological horticulturalist, by the way, and I have a master's in plant science. But I put it there because my worry at the beginning of this is all the misinformation. I will tell you that I have attended 3 presentations that Yana made, and every single one of them was an experiment, was not post-fire research. And Jack Cohen is the guy who did the fire lab, who is the guy that ran the fire lab. So I think there are people out there like Goldner and others who are doing the post-fire analysis. Alexander Seifert is another one. That those are the folks that are really out there doing the post-fire analysis. The other one is Francisco Escobedo. And I know you put a bibliography somewhere here. Did I hear that at the beginning, Snowdy? Was that available? Because I'd love to look at your bibliography and make sure that it's not missing anything, because it sounds like it might be.
Yeah, the bibliography is not a complete one because it's huge to put all the science, but we tried to put some of the key ones on there, and I think you'll see some of them on there like Keeley and stuff. But one thing I wanted to show you, coming back to that Valachovic, this one here is kind of a main one from 2021, and they're looking at the campfires, not experiments. And this is one of the main Valachovic ones that's out there that's talking about homes being too close to each other and all that kind of stuff.
This might be a great opportunity to have ask you for another chapter meeting where we bring some folks in, because I don't want to get into it here. We don't have enough time, but even these post-fire analysis have very limited parameters. And so I'm familiar with them, and we could talk about each one of them, and so you have to understand what exactly they're looking at. And sometimes they're just looking at one element. We just got a presentation from the head of NIST, the engineer, who said, well, a lot of these post-fire analysis, for example, didn't take active firefighting into account, and the campfire is one of those. So
And
it's,
so wait a second. The reason they didn't take it into account is because in that fire in particular, I mean, you're bringing up good points, but I don't think that anybody thinks that it's a cut and dry case. What's interesting in the campfire, and the reason why they did that one was because there basically was no firefighting, because all they could do was try to get people out alive. That's the one where 85 people were killed. And there was basically no firefighting done in that. And that's why they picked that one, because it didn't have firefighting that kind of complicated things.
yeah, what he was saying what had to do with the fact that not including it, even the scientists, even the colleagues are saying, well, this is missing this and this is missing that, and you have to have that to actually come up with these conclusions. I'm a wonk, so I love this stuff. For other folks, I think when we're talking about what to do in our own city here in the city of Los Angeles and fires around and how to home harden. And by the way, there is absolutely no scientific proof that a lot of the things that are being presented out there are actually working, and the percentages of homes that would survive in a fire, even with home hardening, which is still unproven science, even with zone zero, is actually very low. So I would caution anybody to say you're going to save your home if you do these things. And you have to do everything, and your neighbor has to do it too. And it's all very impractical. And so we really want to talk about what are the things that we can do and not destroy nature. But for a lot of what we hear right now, there's just a lot of plant blaming, and I hope you would agree with that. The focus has been on vegetation in policy for a very long time in California, and glad that we're finally at a place where we're talking about urban conflagrations and structures being the problem, and the fact that the space matters most, right? We were supposed to have a 30-foot setback um, rule in the city in California, and that isn't happening in the city of Los Angeles. So these real important conversations need to happen. And, as somebody that's gone through the fire and you know, it's been pretty awful for a lot of us. It's been really important for me to make sure that information is put out there for folks that is accurate, that is honest, and that it tries to erase a lot of the confusion as much as we can, as incomplete as the science is, because that's what those of us who've gone through these fires deserve at this point. And that's where we all can be the most useful, and recognizing the limitations of the science and the not so science, things that we call science that are really experiments and simulations, for example, out there, because, we just need to tell the truth about why we have our fires, what uh, you know, really what we don't know, which is a lot, of what that video from UCLA informs us of, and then also bring in the things that we can do. But these kind of policies that we're seeing come out are very troubling and problematic. And
Well,
I have to
excuse
hand,
me.
yeah.
You-
So
Di-
anyway, I'm
I
sorry
just
I'm
want
going
to
on, and I
point out that
apologize.
you haven't read the CNPS policy.
Correct.
I have, and it is not troubling, in my opinion. So, there are a lot of policies out there, but the policy that is currently being drafted by CNPS, um, I think you would need to read it and then you can criticize it. But
Oh, I apologize if
yeah.
that's what it sounded like. I wasn't. I haven't read
Oh,
it.
okay. That's
I was
kind of
I
the
was saying
feeling I got there.
Yes, sorry, Snooty. No, sorry, let me
Okay,
just correct. I
all
was just
right.
saying in general, and I'll just leave it here. I did hear some things, Alice, and I'm not here to criticize. I did hear some things that made me a little uncomfortable, and I would love for us to work on that. And I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, it seems to me like the message has been that this is a it's a community-based effort by CNPS. The wildfire community is in response to all of the horrible wildfires that have happened, and to all of us all over the state. And to me, it is an effort to gather information and to try to get at a better truth, whatever that might be. Um, I would encourage people to get involved. If Alice wants to recruit other people on her committee, it truly is a a grassroots effort. And they've put a lot of work into what's going on, getting information out there. So, you
Yeah,
know,
and it's interesting with a policy, you want it to be general enough that it covers lots of different things, especially as science changes and finds um, new results. At the same time, you want it to be specific enough to be actually helpful. And so we're kind of walking that fine line between the two, and definitely also trying to the fine line between disagreement over the science. There's definitely disagreement over zone zero. There's disagreement over a lot of the science out there, and so trying to accommodate that in the best way. We've tried to do that with the policy. But yeah, thank you, Snowy. That kind of describes it well.
Can
yeah,
I just
I
add one more thing? The insurance industry is a big factor. Again, not reading your policy, but just the insurance agency, this insurance, because most people need insurance on their house, are really driving a lot of this. And and unfortunately, they have an entirely different risk model that they use and eat and and so I'd love to participate in this if you would be interested, and I'd love for you, Alice, to participate in the Monday meetings if you can make the time. It's at lunch, 12 to 1 every Monday. And I would love just to want to say, remember the insurance industry, because despite what we try to promote out into the community, then the insurance industry has their own ideals.
I understand that the insurance company, the whole thing is frustrating, especially it sounds like down there where some insurance companies aren't paying people. But I think to think that there's somehow a conspiracy is misleading because they really don't want homes building either. They'd much rather we all paid them premiums forever and never had our homes burned down. So their goal isn't that different from ours.
is this the Zone Zero Policy Committee that meets on Mondays? That's what Charles Miller said. Is that the meeting that you're talking about, Diana?
So the Monday meeting, yes. Hi, Charles. I didn't know he was here. The
Yeah.
Monday meeting is focused on the 5 feet around the house. That is true.
And
But it's
is
not the policy, it's the science meeting. So on Tuesdays, there's a policy meeting. I think that's what Charles is referring to, an advocacy meeting. I'm not quite sure if we're still meeting on Tuesdays. But on Mondays is the science meeting, which I thought would be more interesting,
is
folks
that the
here.
one chaired by Nurit Katz?
Yes, yes.
And um, the other thing, there's a lot of information in the chat here. You mentioned that YouTube video, and right now I can't, I'm doing too many things. What's the title of that video? What's the subject? What you threw
Are you talking to me, Snowdy?
no,
To
to
Diana?
Diana.
Okay.
There's in the chat a video you said to watch, and it's what's the subject? What's the title? You said
It's talking about the science, um, the surrounding fire science. It's way up top. Let me put it back. Would it help if I put
Well,
it back in the
no, I
chat
have
for
it here,
you?
but I don't know what the title is. There's a link to it. I don't have the time right now to try to capture that
It's
info.
I think the title is Policy Under Uncertainty Zone Zero and Vegetation Clearance. That's not the title I would give it, but
Okay, so it's a zone zero policy.
yes, zones, it's the science behind Zone Zero or the non-science behind Zone Zero.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we can all agree that there's, and I think Alice started out this talk saying that there's a lot that we don't know. And that's what everybody's trying to do is figure out how to proceed and what's good for each environment that we're all living in, whether it's urban or the WUI, whether we're up north, we're down here in south, whether we're in Chaparral. So I think all of you that are getting involved, Alice, Diana, Charles, you know, getting input, listening to the science or the non-science, that's all we can do is start sifting through and try to find out what's the best thing to do in a particular situation. I know I have a personal axe to grind. I don't want to see chaparral ground up to create a fire break that has no use whatsoever. And, that's one thing that I think Alice brought up is harden the homes, don't go in there and tear up the environment.
Yeah, I
And
think good points. And I think as native plant advocates, that's what we want to see too, is that the focus put on where it should be put on, and that's really on the homes. Right.
so somebody threw the title in Policy Making Under Uncertainty, Zone Zero and Vegetation Clearance. So that's what we have to go in and look for. Thank you. Um, there's a lot of comments in the chat, and I encourage you to look at them. Um, what other questions do we have here for Alice? I I do think, Alice, a question I have, um, how do people get involved? Do you have to be a CNPS member?
Yes, thank you. This is a CNPS community. So eventually maybe some of the stuff we put on the website will be available to anybody, but the community itself is CNPS members. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be presidents or anything like that or some of these other committees, but people within your chapters who are very interested in wildfire stuff and are interested in joining the community are welcome. If we end up with too many members, it could be interesting. But right now, the 15 is working pretty well, but we don't want to leave anybody out who wants, who has input that's a member.
And how are we, you said to contact me or contact you for the draft. Are we talking about the draft that I personally saw posted on the latest chapter council meeting
Yes,
agenda?
although I'm taking comments, I'm making one more draft that uses like comments from some of your people and some others. There's going to be one new one that should be out by the end of this week that if people are interested. But the reason why I said either you or me is you know how to get a hold of me and I can give you the most current one and they know how to get a hold of you. So
Yeah, I can put my email into in case you guys don't have it. And then we'll make sure you get the most recent. Um, because a lot of comments came in I know our chapter, we have conservation chairs, and our conservation chairs for our chapter, I shared that previous draft with them, and they had a lot of really good input. And Cynthia's asking, does the policy address urban housing density?
It does, but in a relatively general way, because of course you can't pick up houses and move them further apart from each other. But so
I
mostly,
was thinking about the planning departments that approve
yeah.
any and everything.
Yeah, so we do talk about how new housing should be further apart from itself. And we didn't really give it a specific number because there's different numbers out there depending on which study you look at. We're trying to be general enough. But yeah, it's definitely something for planning departments to consider, which is a tough one because you're also trying to do more low-income housing, which is, tends to be a lot cheaper if you put it close together. So
Yeah, it's kind of conflicting in that we want infill, at least I personally do. Okay, I know it's that we don't, I personally don't like to see development going out into the Antelope Valley, miles and miles away. It doesn't make sense doing development infill, but that's, of course, more dense buildings. And that then when you have dense buildings and everything's close together, and then we allow ADUs on lots, then you're setting yourself up for that kind of thing. That
right,
it's the fire gets started, the wind is blowing, everything's gone.
right.
Diana has her hand raised. Go ahead, Diana.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Snowdy, because it really is well, both things that you brought up actually about not wanting to destroy our chaparral out in the wildlands. And there's a whole conversation about that. I agree with you. But in terms of the density issue, I think the problem is that we're densifying the very high fire hazard zone. And that's not the place to have density. And so one of the big problems with mitigation, which zone zero is considered a mitigation. So how do we get from a state law that says in the high fire areas, we're supposed to have 30 feet between houses to where we are today, right? Which is 5 feet and 4 feet if you want to put an ADU on. And we got that way because of these so-called mitigations. And one of them is zone zero. Or will be, and that is being used to say by some circles right now that we could build more in the very high fire hazard zone. And so that's one of the poison pills of something like a zone zero. But in terms of density, I've been out there speaking in a policy perspective saying, sure, there's places and I'm always talking about my frame as the city of Los Angeles. There's places in Los Angeles where we can have that, and we should, but the high fire severity zone is not one of those places. And so we wanted to talk less about vegetation and from a policy perspective, and more about land use strategies, because that's where we would be missing if we're talking about policy, if we're not talking about land use strategies, so that we're not putting people in the danger zones, a type of land use in an area that it doesn't make sense to have that type of land use. And where all the science agrees on one thing. This we can agree on. Every one of the fire scientists say that what matters most is the distance between your house and your neighbor's house in a high fire severity zone.
It's interesting, Diana, because it's not necessarily just high fire severity zones, because you can have areas like there were areas in Altadena that were not considered high fire severity zones. And the problem with urban conflagrations is we're getting to whole new areas that weren't on our radar as being a high fire risk, because it may have started as a wildfire, but then it's just an urban conflagration.
Right,
So it's more
because that
complicated. It's more
yeah, because
complicated.
it's a really good point, Al. Sorry, sometimes I have the problem of being anticipatory, so I apologize. It's because one house caught the other one on fire, right? And
Right.
also, come on, that was a firestorm. By the way, I worked with the Walt Disney Company for many years and other property management companies in disaster recovery on the East Coast, in hurricane country especially. So I understand all of this from a wider perspective, but that's what happened. One house caught fire, the next house caught fire. And also, this is really important. Active firefighting in California is no longer how we are going to be fighting fires. They want to fight fires through home hardening and vegetation removal. And I have some grave concerns about that, but we are shifting, at least in the urban environment, from active firefighting to putting the onus on the private property owner to defend their own home through home hardening, which can be very expensive. And in my case, you couldn't do it for my home, just isn't
Yeah.
possible. Um,
Diana,
yeah.
did you feel that fire suppression worked?
We didn't have active firefighting. When you say fire suppression, are you talking about active firefighting?
When there's so many homes burning that you'd have to have basically every firefighter in California there instantly. With climate change and these big fires, I mean, you can't just rely on fire suppression.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're talking about, which is no, you can't just rely on fire suppression. You're absolutely right. And you have to look at land use policy as part of it, is what I'm saying. And what the fire folks are telling us is that there would never be enough firefighters or enough water. I think that's what you're referring to fight these firestorms. You'd have to have a firefighter probably at every house. That's what they're saying. And that's why they are moving from a model that we've had in the past that relies on active firefighting or that can work in a very different context than the urban context. But Dr. John Keeley has been very clear and very clear as of 6 months ago, because we had him do a presentation for Brentwood, that the urban fires are 100% because of structure density.
Yeah.
And so we can't leave that out of the equation, and we're not going to mitigate that because we don't plant trees in between our houses. So I really will look at the policy so I understand it from this perspective. I'm speaking in generalities here about, this really important context. But anyway, Snowdy, I would just say, that's one of the things we're trying to advocate for. One of the reasons we get concerned about adding density to the very high fire hazard zones. And once they start there, they are going to go down into the city. The new maps in the city of Los Angeles include areas as very high fire hazard severity zones, like Koreatown and Hollywood. I'm not talking about the Hollywood Hills. I'm talking about Hollywood south of Sunset Boulevard. So, we're seeing these fire maps expand in ways that we never have seen before because the structures are the fire's fuel in the urban context.
Well, it seems like maybe we need another program dealing with this in sometime in the future, and we can further discuss, not just right now. This program has been directed at the CNPS Wildfire Community, what it's doing, drafting policy for CNPS, and that's a totally different topic than us talking about zone zero. And I did, I have tried, I did ask a certain person to talk to our CNPS group about zone zero. And I was told not now. So I will still pursue that again from somebody, a certain someone that I don't want to name a name because I just told you I was told no, but I will push the issue again and we will try to have a zone zero program. Right now I have June free that I'm for my programming. So there's someone there from California Native Plant Society with a raised hand. I don't know who that is. So you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? That's how you show up. Did you?
Snowdy, this is Louise.
Oh, hi, Louise.
Hi. I just wanted to tell people that if you want to save the information in the chat, if you go to the chat window, to the very top of the chat window, there are three little dots. You click on the three little dots and you get a little menu, and one of the items in the menu is Save the Chat. And that will save it to your computer as a text file. So that way you'll have all the links that people posted.
Hmm. Oh, I see what you're saying. What is it? I've never saved the chat. When I do that, Louise, um, where does it save it to?
It just saves it to a file on your computer. Um,
Wherever your
it's
default setting is for saving downloads.
yeah,
Oh, okay. All right. So it's a
it's
download.
in a folder called Zoom.
Okay, because there is a lot of information in the chat. And so if people want um that info saved, do that. Go to the chat, go to the three dots, save chat.
You can also go into your settings on your Zoom and change it so it like saves things to your desktop if that's easier for you to find it. Then you only have to do that once.
Okay, thank you, Charles. All right. Any other questions or comments? Clearly, there's a lot that needs to be done and a lot more study that has to happen. Diana, do you want to weigh in again?
Sorry, and I promise you I won't comment. I have a question, maybe of Alice. Alice, there is a wonderful study that John Keeley did with Greg Rubens. I think Alexander Seifard was in there as well, on chaparral, a side-by-side study where the conclusion of the study is that lightly irrigated chaparral didn't burn so much. Do you have that study?
Yes, I have read it. And, it's really interesting. As a Northern Californian, the idea of needing to put lots of plants in, but irrigating them even lightly, the way Greg Rubin wants you to, is concerning to me because of the water issue. Part of why we promote native plants is because they're water conserving, and that's true. But the idea of having to water things well, and again, Greg Rubin, he does pretty well about, talking about just once a month, just a pretty mild, sprinkling. And that's different than what some people are trying to do of, major irrigation of plants to somehow make them more fire resistant. But anyway, yes, I have seen that study. And I don't know if that particular one is in the bibliography for the policy, but I think it's in the bibliography we've been preparing for the website eventually.
Right.
Any other questions or comments? Alice, I thank you so much being, for all the hard work that you and your community have put into this effort. It is truly valuable and clearly much needed. And I know there have been some staff people working on it too, but it is mainly a volunteer effort, unpaid. And you need to be thanked for doing it and for continuing the effort. And if people are interested in joining, if you're a CNPS member and you want to get involved in the wildfire community, I'm sure Alice would welcome you into that group. But it clearly they're doing a lot of work, and it's a commitment. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for coming today and listening.
And remember, this is recorded, and it will, Louise will post it to our website in a week or so when she gets around to it. So you can, if you missed the first part, or if you need to go over her slides again, you can see it again. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Hope to see you again. Thanks. I'm going to end the meeting.
Can I throw in an announcement before everybody goes?
Oh, sure. You better do it.
Okay, I'll do it really quickly. So if you're going to the convention in Riverside, I have a presentation that's going to be happening Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So please come hear about a native street tree pilot project that we're doing in Los Angeles, planting a bunch of species that have never been used by the city of LA before. And spoiler alert, they're doing really well. And also another thing, if you're going and you're going out Wednesday for some of the advanced hikes and classes and things that they're doing on Wednesday, I will be hosting for Los Angeles and Riverside County Climate Reality Project a reception for convention goers, which will be at the Mission Inn, at the Mexican restaurant at the Mission Inn, which is like 2 blocks away from the convention center, which would be at 7 p.m. On that Wednesday. I'm going to include the link to Climate Reality, and you can find it there. And if you are interested in Climate Reality Project, on the 25th of this month at 7 p.m., which is a Sunday evening, we are doing our annual virtual meeting, or not our monthly virtual meeting, which will include an interview I'll be doing with Evan Schwartz, who is a really interesting climate writer, works for Smithsonian Magazine and many others, and nationally known as a climate writer. He just did a really interesting article on the kelp forests, which are native plants to California, right off in the Channel Islands area. That is in Smithsonian. We'll be talking about that and many other things. So all of that is at climatereality.org, laclimatereality.org. I will include the meet and greet link for this Wednesday evening thing. And then if you want to see the thing if you want to reserve for Evan Schwartz thing, then just come to basically the homepage and it'll link you there. So there's that too. Sorry if I was a little discombobulated there at the end. Thank you very much for the opportunity to announce that stuff, Snowdy.
Sure. Thank you. All right, guys. See you hopefully at the conference. And if not, at our next meeting in March.
Night, everybody. Have a wonderful week.